Welcome, Mr. Wazirudin.
Thank you, Your Worship and councillors. And thanks for having me this evening. I'm Saleh Wazirudin, Chair of the City's Anti-Racism Advisory Committee. We've seen right here the brazenness with which the hate crime, vandalism at the Harriet Tubman Public School and nearby places happened without any hint of shame. You councillors and other elected officials in Niagara have experienced this brazenness directly, no fear of getting caught. We've seen the open brazenness with the recorded video of Deputy PM Christopher Freeland being harassed. They get this daring from the normalization of hate, from making a mockery and the butt of jokes of racialized people, women, and to us LGBTQIA plus people. You don't just have to take my word for it though. When StatCan recently came out with their report saying police reported hate crimes have gone up 72% just over the last 2 years, and that's a very narrow definition of hate crimes, and only the ones where people need to call the police, the executive director of the Canadian Race Relations Foundation said, it's a fire hose of hate that's growing honestly like a wildfire, and unmitigated, we will grow further to a point where we will normalize being on wildfire. And that is because we have left this environment unchecked. So there's no surprise about what's coming to town. Jeff Dunham's agent has already publicized that characters already condemned by industry associations and civil rights groups like the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation as Racist will be in the act, like Ahmed the Dead Terrorist or Jose Jalapeno. But again, don't just take my word for it. Jeff Dunham himself said he doesn't want to be that offensive, but he feels he has to be because that's what got him to where he is. That's what he's made his living off of. But even more famous comedians like Jay Leno have apologized for a long history of racist jokes and said if comedians won't change, they shouldn't be telling jokes. And when complaints came in before, he had dismissed them as not being able to take a joke. But he knew then in his heart that he was wrong, and even he is admitting it now. You heard earlier tonight from the mayor about how sports are adapting. And so is comedy, and we should expect no less. Remember, please, that this is not just some private event that council is being asked to intervene in. It is an event on city property, paid for and maintained by our public money. The Meridian Center doesn't get teleported to another galaxy because there's a ticketed commercial event happening here. City policies still apply, and as our elected officials, you still have a say. The city already has a policy making clear there is zero tolerance for racism in this kind of performance. The R-Zone policy was initially designed to respond to hate and racism at sports events, but it's clear that it's for all events and specifically mentions the Meridian Center. Canceling this performance would not be that unusual. It's been happening rapidly in the last few years, especially since reopenings began since the pandemic. Just a few months ago, almost right across the border at SUNY Plattsburgh, they canceled a transphobic comedian. Several cities in the UK canceled a comedian just for a racist tweet last year, and his agent even dropped him. The residents of St. Catharines deserve no less, because you can't have it both ways. When there's a hate crime, we can't say we're a compassionate city, racism won't be tolerated here, but when a brazenly, openly racist, misogynist, homophobic act comes to town, we then say, oh well, we have no choice but to lie down and do nothing. That's why it's vital to make an amendment to the motion tonight to direct staff to enter into negotiations with the relevant parties to pursue cancellation of this event. That's how it's been done elsewhere, and that's how we can do it here to start reversing what's been called an escalating wildfire of hate around us. St. Catharines is just one of the Ontario stops of Jeff Dunham's tour. We pride ourselves in our association with the history of Harriet Tubman, who did what was right without worrying about the barriers to justice and equality. St. Catharines has an opportunity here to lead the way, to bring the other cities in on this and to stop this harmful performance from not just coming to St. Catharines, but also beyond. From my experience, unfortunately, there are some who are more concerned about not offending the racists or those who think racism is funny than they are about the damage racism, misogyny, and homophobia causes to our communities. If Jay Leno can recognize comedy needs to change, if SUNY Plattsburgh can cancel a major comedian for transphobia, then we in St. Catharines can do the same. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for your presentation. Any questions of the council? Councillor Sorrento.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the presenter. I just need some clarification. Since you are the chair of the Anti-Racism Committee, which is an advisory committee to City Council, are you tonight, sir, representing that committee as the chair, or are you speaking as a resident?
I am speaking as the chair of the city's Anti-Racism Advisory Committee. Sorry, I thought I had clarified at the beginning. If I didn't, I apologize.
Forgive me, I must have missed that. So, so procedurally, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the clerk and or to our solicitor, then do you have, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the presenter, so do you have the permission of the committee and all of the members?
Through your worship, yes, I do.
Thank you. No further questions.
Councillor Miller?
Thanks, Sala. I think one of the big components here is to sort of go forward on the policy, and I know you and I talked about that when we talked about the sustainability level. But with regards to this specific show, what would your response be to the Meridian Center, who has basically said that their responsibility is to provide a safe environment within the venue? And I think the implication is if you're going to be hurt or offended by someone like Jeff Dunham, then don't go to the show.
Through your worship, I wish we could just whoever didn't want to hear this, because doesn't think racism is funny, could just bury their heads in the sand. But unfortunately, we can't. Unfortunately, this kind of performance, I hesitate to call it comedy, does cause damage that affects us all. It does create an environment that, as I read earlier from the executive director of the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, does normalize mockery and making the butt of jokes of racialized people, women, and LGBTQ2SI plus people. And that directly leads to an environment where people think it's okay to commit hate crimes, and that could escalate into violence. There is a direct link between the normalization of this kind of mockery and the spike in hate crimes we've been seeing locally and across Canada. And that's just not my opinion. Even comedians have realized this and recognized this, like Jay Leno himself.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Kushner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're talking about a contractual relationship, and I would like to hear from our legal department after the questions are asked.
Thank you, Councillor Kushner. Councillor Littleton.
Your worship, if I could just comment?
That wasn't a question for you.
Okay, no problem.
Councillor Littleton.
Thank you to Councillor Kushner for asking that. I was going to ask the same, but I also wanted to ask about, I don't know if staff can answer it, so maybe I need to save it, but I do have questions for staff.
Yeah, for staff. So
Okay.
any further questions of the presenter?
Thank you.
Okay, the only question I have, and again, appreciate the presentation, is in terms of the scope of where we're going with, deciding as a council or as a committee what's appropriate or not. And to the presenter, would the next step be going into our libraries and removing books that would have characters of fiction that could be seen as offensive to a group?
Your worship, I think that's a different topic, but of interest, it is notable that the Welland Library actually did a decolonization project where they went through their material and addressed material that was anti-Indigenous. So, but that's right now. This is about a performance, a concrete performance that's coming to town, and other places have canceled such events, and it can be done. Other places have done it contractually, and it can be done by the city through negotiating with the parties that are involved.
And I appreciate the response. It's when council's asked to make a decision, we can't make a decision in a vacuum, because one of the points that you're making out is that it's at a public facility, but we have a public library that, while you've pointed out the decolonization of books, there are books in there that outside of that would be offensive to some groups. So do we, as a public property, do we go in and remove those books? And who makes that decision, I guess?
Through your worship, I mean, I'm certainly in favor of, removing, well, getting rid of anything openly racist. But I think that is different from what's being talked about here, because our zone policy is about actions, not about materials, from what I understand. So if somebody was in the public library and they were making a racist speech, then I think that would fall under the our zone policy. But I don't think the our zone policy goes to literature.
And so, just as a further question, and I appreciate the comment to the presenter, as a further question, though, we're talking about the artistic creation of characters, and there are books that are centered around characters. So, Satanic Verses by Solomon Rushdie is someone that has been targeted because he created a fictional character. So, there's groups that would have liked that book to remove. Do we remove that book from our library?
Your Worship, I can't speculate on a hypothetical. I don't know that.
Not a
that
hypothetical.
Book is sorry, go ahead.
It's not a hypothetical. That is offensive to certain groups. Do we remove that book?
I don't know if that book is in the library, but I don't think that's the same as a comedy act, or act that's being billed as a comedy act.
So just demonstrating how difficult it is to put a defined line on the creation of characters, and how do we as council address that? So I'm not debating with you. I'm just showing you how it impacts the potential overarching policy of what we look at within the entire corporation. So I do appreciate the dialogue. Councillor Phillips, you got your hand up?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Director Christie.
But these aren't questions of the staff yet, Councillor? Just to the presenter?
Yes, I asked of staff.
No, this isn't for staff. This is for the presenter. Do you have a question to the presenter?
Yeah. My understanding right now is that this event is virtually sold out. We've had emails today from people supporting the fact that the event goes on. Are you not concerned that if it was canceled, there's going to be a lot of people who are very upset with, and your anti-racism committee has done some really good work, without a doubt, for the social sustainability committee. I'm not denying that, but my point is if this gets canceled, there's going to be, I don't know, 4,000 or 5,000 people, however many seats have been sold. We're going to be very upset because the anti-racism committee has brought this forward, and it's going to cast a negative effect on the good work that you've done so far. Is that not a concern at all?
Through your worship, I think that this is exactly a point of that there's people who don't want to offend or upset the thousands of people who do want to watch a racist performance. But I think the damage caused by the racist performance is greater, and that we shouldn't. Unfortunately, there's a long history of not wanting to upset people who either are racist or who think it's funny. Think racism is funny. But I think that the damage that's caused by this kind of performance is much greater, and that's what we should be focusing on, and not on the people who bought the tickets.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've come back from in camera. We do have a motion that is on the floor. I'll ask for the council coordinator to put it on the floor. It is moved by Councillor Miller, seconded by Councillor Porter, I believe. And it's a three-part motion. The first part of the motion is to receive the Anti-Racism Committee resolution regarding the performance by Jeff Dunham. The second one is to request that ASM Global consider canceling the Jeff Dunham performance, and that going forward, city staff look at creating guiding principles for future performances at all city facilities with input from equity-seeking groups and or advisory committees. So with that, does anyone, and I know we got legal advice, so we could just call the question.
Can I ask that we vote separately, Mr. Mayor?
Yep, so we'll split the three apart. Councillor Phillips, and then Councillor Miller and Councillor Porter.
Just a question to Director Christie. could you clarify the R-zone policy as to whether it applies to this performance or not?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the R-zone policy was developed with every intention to address issues that we were experiencing or that our major user groups were experiencing while attending programs at our facilities, which in this case would be related to our sports activities. And as you know, the Meridian Center also hosts those types of activities, and so that's why the Meridian Center was included in the list of facilities for the policy. It did not name these types of performances, so in my opinion, it doesn't apply.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Phillips. Councillor Miller?
Thank you. Through you to the Mr. Christie, if someone walked into a hockey game and was espousing homophobic language or language that targeted identifiable minority groups, would they be asked to leave?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes. So the intent would be the major user group who would be renting the facility at that time would deal with the infraction at that time and ask that person to leave. It wouldn't be for the staff necessarily to intervene. It would be the major user group that would be renting the facility to do that.
And I think this is where this looks hypocritical to have the policy that is intolerant of intolerance in our arenas and our public facilities, and then to not have a policy that allows for someone who might be espousing the same thing to be paid lots of money to come into our city and do that with no real issue there. And I think the mayor asked a good question about who makes these decisions. Ultimately, we make these decisions at City Council about city facilities and city contracts. We do it with the input of committees like this committee that we specifically set up to provide the lived experience of racialized people who actually experience racism, like none of us at this council does. I think we have seemingly scoffed at their recommendations a number of times. I can think of the Watson statue. I can think of CCTV cameras downtown. I can think of body cameras on police, the demilitarization of the police. We never voted on the resolutions around truth and reconciliation and murder and missing Indigenous women. I think it creates an atmosphere of distrust when we ask for this committee to give us their experience and we don't take those experiences seriously. What they're asking for us to do is pretty basic here, is to ask the Meridian Center to consider canceling a show that racialized people in our community consider harmful and hateful. I don't think it's a stretch to see why. With Jeff Dunham's show specifically, with characters that some of the most Islamophobic and homophobic things I've seen and heard on a comedy stage, things that were hateful and out of place 20 years ago and certainly are now as well. So I think it's important for us that we start to support these committees who are doing the labor of providing their painful experiences to us. And again, I do think it is a bit hypocritical given our zone policy. So to me, I think asking ASM is a pretty easy thing to do with regards to this specific show, and the bigger picture is to have a policy in place that allows racialized people, allows members of the queer community to provide input on these performances that are happening in our city at city facilities. So that's why I brought the motion forward, and I'm hoping we can support that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Miller. Councillor Porter?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This has been an issue for a while. I feel as if there's a bit of a disconnect or maybe a misalignment between ASM's diversity policy. When looking at it, it's actually kind of weak, and where the city's going and the direction that we're headed. And I'm actually quite disappointed. When I saw this announced, I posted about it on Instagram and said, really, like, I was literally shocked. I thought it was honestly poor decision making. And of all the comedians in the entire world that we could book in our city, this is a choice, and I just don't understand. So I'm really in favor of the policy. This is a really interesting discussion around, what is free speech, what is unacceptable. And Jeff Dunham is, he's built his career on racist, anti-Semitic tropes. I have no trouble saying that because just a simple Google search will return all kinds of things, and it's easy for anyone to see some of the things that his characters have said. You know, when it's all under the guise of humor, this is how he gets away with it, and he does acknowledge that I only offend, you know, a certain percentage of the population, where most of his people who support his comedy are white people. Back in 2018, I was in front of the Meridian Centre protesting because there was a call to ask the Meridian Centre to cancel the band Radley because the lead singer was, there were serious allegations of sexual assault and abuse of women and also teenagers, underage girls. And at that point, it wasn't new news. It was, he had been dropped by his management company. He had been dropped by Caesars in Windsor, a private facility. And there was a debate and discussion around, you know, should we cancel this? The Meridian Centre decided not to cancel. There was a protest out front. I was there, and, you know, other private facilities said, we'll honor your Radley ticket and we're going to have a show with someone else. And I feel that at that time, there should have been a discussion or a review around, you know, cancellation policies for situations like this, insurance, so that when these situations arise, we can protect ourselves, protect the corporation. But my position is it is a municipal facility. It is currently taxpayer funded to some extent. And I feel like this is an important opportunity to ask ASM Global to take a look at our equity, diversity policies and where we're going as a community, and do a better job booking better acts. And, you know, I feel like they're you know, I worry about people who work at the Meridian Centre who, for example, are Muslim, and they're going to have to sit through an Ahmed the terrorist show. And where's the thought behind that? I'm struggling with it. So I understand that because of contractual obligations, the council cannot tell Meridian Centre what to do, or we can't force them to cancel it. But this is a great opportunity to have a review of our contract and ask them how they can improve their booking and how they can align and maybe listen to our anti-racism committees on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. Any further comments on the motion? Councillor Kushner, I see you reaching for something. Yep. Councillor Kushner? You just got to unmute too.
Yeah, the conversation we're having reminds me of one we had several years ago about books being banned in the library. And we had a group that found some of the books extremely offensive. And I thought they were very insensitive. But then they came to council and they wanted council to ban the books. And our policy was that we shouldn't get involved. That was up to the library board to make decisions on banning books. And of course, librarians are not generally not in favor of banning books. So I think we made the right decision not to get involved and let the library do it, because even though it wasn't contractual, we did have an arrangement with them. And then years later, we had Michael Ignatieff, who was the leader of the Liberal Party and leader of the opposition at one time, make some pretty disparaging comments about Ukrainians in his book. And the Ukrainian community was very, very alarmed. And I didn't agree with Ignatieff's comments, but at the same time, I respected his right to make it. And because I found them very insensitive, I certainly was not in favor of banning his books. He's a very thoughtful individual, but of course, at times, our comments can be very insensitive. And because they're insensitive, that doesn't make the person a racist, because we do have freedom of speech, and I will not be supporting the recommendation before us.
Thank you, Councillor Kushner. Councillor Littleton?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think that this is a really interesting conversation that we're having, and it's necessary, and I think it's really good. And what part of this motion that I think is excellent is the third part, that going forward, city staff look at creating guiding principles for future performances. I think really that's what I think that we can take from this. I'm just going to be honest. We can for sure ask ASM to consider canceling it. The answer is going to be no. Like, I think we can ask, and people say, well, you should ask anyway. But I think at this point, like the concert of sock puppets, like I don't even know what this guy is. I think everybody, you know, what I'm hearing though, like about this guy is not good, and it's not a show. Obviously, this is probably why I have no idea who this guy is, because this is not something that I would want to watch. And I know what Councillor Miller is talking about when we talk about some comedians. I was at something at Frosh Week of a very famous comedian, and he got on stage, and now he's very famous and he's very well known. At that time, he was just starting out. He was a cast of Saturday Night Live, and it was horrific, the things that came out of his mouth. And it was like all over the newspaper, and they couldn't believe that he had gotten booked, but nobody had actually looked at the show that he did. They just thought, well, we'll get this guy because he's coming into his own and what have you. But it was a nightmare. It was just awful. So I can just imagine what the sock puppets are saying in this performance. So I'm glad that the committee has brought this forward. Clearly, I wish that we had this though, like 6 months ago or something, because maybe we could have, I don't know. Like, I feel like we're really out of time here to do anything like that. And also we just heard we actually can't cancel it. So that needs to be clear to the public. We cannot do that. So I'm really excited about number 3 and appreciate the work for bringing this forward and at least sharing all of this information with us. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Littleton. Any further questions? I'm not seeing any hands go up.
Mr. Mayor, procedural question. Someone asked that the motion be split into 3 parts.
Yes.
So could we vote on them separately, please?
Yes. Yeah, we'll be doing that.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so, again, my final comments, not to go any too much further, but again, this is in isolation. I think it's not an area where we should be making a decision in isolation, because while some people may take offense with the artistic element of the performance, it's better to have a policy to look at first. And I will say this, we own the First Ontario Performing Arts Centre. It has a film theatre in it. It is programmed 365 days a year. And I am sure certain films that are shown there would be offensive to certain groups, but they too don't have a policy to look through and figure out what can they show and can they not show. They do it because they look at it through a lens of artistic integrity and say, what should we show on the screen tonight? So I think point number 3 is probably the best part of this motion, in that it does give hopefully guiding principles. But in that decision, we must always remember as council, we're not the thought police. We are not the ones that ban books. We are not the ones, it's not our decision, even though that's our facilities. But if we can have a policy, and those who are making the choices for selection, they'll be able to look at and say, here's what's best for our community moving forward. So I'll ask for the motion to be split as requested. We'll start with the first one, and then we'll move through to the second and third one. So the first one is to receive the information. Can we do a show of hands on that one? So to receive the information from the Anti-Racism Committee. All in favor? And that's carried unanimously. We'll go to point number 2, and that'll be a recorded vote.
So on the second clause, Councillor Miller,
Yes.
Councillor Porter,
Yes.
Councillor Sorrento,
No.
Councillor Williamson,
No.
Councillor Dodge,
No.
Councillor Garcia,
No.
Councillor Harris,
No.
Councillor Kushner,
No.
Councillor Littleton,
No.
Councillor McPherson,
No.
Councillor Phillips,
No.
Mayor Sendzik,
No.
and that's lost.
On the third one, recorded to vote?
Councillor Miller,
Yeah.
Councillor Porter,
Yes.
Councillor Phillips,
Yes.
Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor Littleton,
Yes.
Councillor Kushner,
Yes.
Councillor Harris,
Yes.
Councillor Garcia,
Yes.
Councillor Dodge,
Yes.
Councillor Williamson,
Yes.
Councillor Sorrento,
Yes.
and Mayor Sendzik,
Yes.
and that's carried.
Just some direction from the CAO in terms of, as we know, we don't want to be in the situation 6 months from now. So when can we anticipate a policy being created?
Through Mr. Mayor, we'll target to do this as quickly as possible with the, that we're going to get into some timing issues with the input from the various committees. But yeah, we'll look to do this as quick as we can.
Okay, thank you. Okay.